Welcome to part 2 of our basic income event. We're going to mix things up a little bit for part 2, and I'm going to ask Floyd and Sheila to come and join us. Don't fall off the stage. We have comfortable seats for you.
This is your water and this is mine.
All right, so what we're going to do next is we're calling it a debate, but it's going to be more of an exploratory panel of both sides of the basic income argument. I say that because Sheila and Floyd are both proponents of basic income. I think we flipped a coin and Floyd lost, so he is going to be helping us understand some of the cons of basic income or the arguments against. And Sheila has a much easier job for this audience, and based on the previous speakers, of arguing for. I met Floyd. When did we meet?
Yeah, right after the pilot was canceled.
Yeah, when was that? At least 7 or 8 years ago.
Yeah, like 2018.
Yeah, awesome. No, it was earlier than that, wasn't it? Maybe. Oh, wait, that was 5 years ago. Okay, maybe. But Floyd is a technologist. He's got a big fan following here at Intelliware. Floyd founded, what is it, CB4?
I wish I found his CB4.
Co-founder of C4 Media, which runs one of the world's largest recurring technology conferences. He's the founder of UBI Works and Commonwealth.ca, which has 100,000 plus supporters. It's the largest activist movement in Canada in basic income. I really admire what Floyd has done and happy to support him with events like this. Sheila Regehr is a founding member of the Basic Income Canada Network and its chair since 2014. She's also the co-author with Chandra Pasma of Basic Income, Some Policy Options for Canada in 2019. And she's a former executive director of the National Council of Welfare. So welcome and thank you. I do have questions here.
Yeah, and there's been no rehearsal, so this is going to be fun.
Well, Sheila said to me, she's going to answer whatever question I feel like answering. So I'm not sure I'm completely in control. And actually, speaking of questions, we didn't have questions after either Evelyn or Ken. But what we thought we'd do is at the end, we'll kind of bring everybody up and people can ask questions. And whoever would like to take the question, maybe multiple people can take the question. So think about your questions. Okay, let's get into it. Too many papers. People often ask if basic income will impact people's taxes, and that's not something we directly talked about, right? Do we need to raise taxes to pay for this? Can you help us understand why they might think that? You want to start, Floyd?
All right. So, so I'm the organizer with a small team of UBI Works. How many people came here from an email from me at UBI Works? All right, pretty cool. And how many people know me from the software development side, InfoQ and QCon? All right, that's cool. Yeah, it's nice intersection of places. So, yeah, so I've been asked to play the naysayer, which is a little painful, since I spent 5 years of my life promoting basic income. So I'm not going to try and enter the role of opponent, but I'm going to tell you what their best talking points are, and then you can decide. Hopefully, I don't do too good a job. Yeah, will it raise taxes? Almost certainly, most likely. A naysayer would say, well, you guys have this rhetorical point that cost of poverty is 80 billion and basic income also costs a gross cost of 80 billion. Even if you cut if you replace the number of programs, the net cost goes down to 51 billion. But where's that 51 billion going to come from? And one of my personal pet peeves with a lot of the existing how-to-pay plans, including the PBOs, is that they do suggest broad-based taxes that would impact the middle class. But those are just particular ways to pay for it. So it really depends on your politics, who's in charge when it gets implemented of what are the ways to pay. Two-thirds, you saw early in the slide, 2/3 of Canadians are for basic income. But you didn't see the slide that says only a third will be willing to pay more tax for it. So that's clearly an electoral challenge, which is why if you go to ubiworks.ca website, we put out a how to pay article that doesn't fall on the vast majority of working people and mainly affects some taxes on the financial sector, no offense, and on some loopholes used by large corporations. as well as the super wealthy, that would not impact economic productivity. So really, there's like millions of ways to pay for a basic income. Some of the best ways that have been suggested have been from the natural resource sector, because who actually owns the value of minerals and air and oil, increasing taxes on that as a form of commonwealth.
Starting to agree on things now.
Yeah, I'm falling
I
back
better
into my
cut him off.
my usual rules, but yes, it would raise people's taxes, but it depends on how it's implemented. And I'm really upset when I see plans that suggest raising taxes in the middle class, because I don't think anyone would think that will work unless we're literally in a crisis moment.
So
Wait a second. So thank you, Floyd, for that hard-hitting start. Sheila, why does Floyd want to raise our taxes to pay for basic income?
So I'm really, really glad that Floyd started out talking about the PBO report, because the answer to this question is it depends. It depends on how you design this basic income and how you decide you're going to pay for it and what your goals are. So what the Parliamentary Budget Office was asked to do by other people was to design a basic income according to some parameters. And in their modeling, they ended up with a result that was not the kind of thing that we would design as the Basic Income Canada movement and most of the people who coalesce around the kind of benefit that we're looking for. So in their model, it ended up that the lowest deciles were benefiting, and then there was, when you start, very quickly, people who are just doing a little bit better start paying, and that definitely is not something we want. Like, we don't want to tax the people who are just barely getting by in order to support those at the lower end of the income spectrum. But we, in the report that you mentioned, that I co-authored, Chandra Pasma really did all the work on that, and Evelyn was part of the advisory group. I mean, we designed it deliberately so that it promotes the elimination of poverty, but it also promotes equality, including gender equality, and it makes sure that those at the very upper end of the income spectrum are the ones that are going to be paying for whatever tax changes you see. And Evelyn kind of touched on that, but one of the real benefits of having a basic income run through the tax system is an incredible opportunity to straighten out some of the really complex mechanisms and messes that are in the tax system. So it makes things much simpler, much more understandable. People know what kind of money they're getting and why. So the tax issue is important, but you have to be careful about the design issues and really look at it carefully.
Well, Canadians like to pay taxes, so I don't think it'll be a problem.
The Scandinavians do. We've done research on that.
We're pretty good too, actually. I think. Okay, question 2. And way to fight back, Sheila. New technology and AI. So something that we do a lot of here at Intelliware, and you hear a lot of technologists actually are big proponents of basic income, because we see technology as fueling a world of abundance, and how should we share that abundance? And the economy is changing all the time because of technology and innovation. So how does that relate to basic income? Floyd, you want to start again?
All right, so this is part of what brought me into the space as a software developer. But what opponents would say is, well, basic income is not a good solution to automation, because technology always creates more jobs. And after every industrial revolution, poverty rates have gone down in the long term. So why do we need this? And and they might say, well, so yeah, sure, some people are displaced from their work. It happened to my father and uncle, who lost their jobs in automotive manufacturing in the 2000s. When we had a sudden automation wave in response to a competition from China. They may say, well, but we should have more targeted programs to help those people. You don't need a basic income for everyone. And so that's kind of what the opposition would say, that this is, or some would even deny that technological job automation even exists, which I think is kind of silly, but since it literally happened to my family. But overall, if there's only one thing to understand about impact of technology on jobs, it's lower wages. So generally the research shows that the middle class has been shrinking, primarily due to technological development, which also drives globalization and union decline. Technology is kind of at the root of it, as well as more people joining the ranks of lower income work, which is increasingly more precarious and more sliced and diced into gig economy jobs. And that's an impact of technology. You can't deny that. And like, wouldn't it be better? Some would argue it'd be better to have a basic income, so those jobs have more security. And opponents would say, well, no, people should just fend for themselves. That's the best I got as to try and be a naysayer.
You can see how painful this is for Floyd, eh? And I did say we were friends. But very convincing, Floyd. And now over to Sheila for her rebuttal.
Yeah, so this comes up a lot from economists who look at things from a really big picture perspective. I'm not an economist, so you're not going to get that kind of thing from me. I tried. I took economics courses, and they went around assuming things that just made no sense to me. But getting back to like what the things that Ken was talking about in real life, the economists may be right. Like, it may actually be true that lots and lots of different jobs are going to be created, that there's going to be more jobs, that AI is going to generate all kinds of things that, you know, we never anticipated, and it's going to open up wonderful things for us. But people need to eat dinner tonight and breakfast tomorrow, and you have to pay your rent at the beginning of the month. And if your skills and your industry really changes, you can't turn on a dime and occupy those new jobs. Like, it's just not going to happen that way. And the way most of our social infrastructure is developed now, it doesn't allow you to get ahead. It doesn't allow you to, I mean, there are real restrictions on the kinds of educational attainment you can get when you're on social assistance, for example. And if you're in a low-income job, you can't take time off to go get some upgrading and training to get the next job. You don't even have time to go apply for the next job because you're working too hard on the current one. So this AI, regardless of whether you see it as positive or negative or what may come, it's disruptive. And people don't manage disruption well if you don't have some kind of income security to help you through those transitions.
Oh, applause.
And one kind of,
I don't know, Dr. Forget is sitting there going, I don't know if I like being slammed as an economist, but we might have to bring you into the debate in a moment. But
one of the one of the striking points that I recollect is the Mark Carney, the former Bank of Canada and Bank of England governor, did a really interesting talk that has very low views on YouTube, so you should check it out, about the impact of technology on jobs. And he points out, he actually responds to naysayers who say, well, every industrial revolution results in more prosperity. He says, yeah, but for who? The benefits show up like 100 years later. They don't show up to the people now whose jobs are being displaced. And 100 years later, why are they showing up? They're not showing up because suddenly there's a lot of great jobs. They're showing up because there's a labor movement fighting for greater pay and jobs. So if I were a naysayer, I would say, well, let the labor movement do it. We don't need basic income.
Can I tell one more little story before we leave the AI thing?
I think I have to say yes.
Okay, so this is like true. We have a journalist who works for us at the Basic Income Canada Network who, you know, finds articles, sometimes create things, puts them up on the website. He had this great idea at one point that he was actually going to ask AI what its opinion of a basic income was. And he didn't say, tell me why you would support a basic income, why AI would support a basic income, or why, you know, this would be good in the AI world. It just said, what do you think about this? And AI wants it. So there we go.
We should have had ChatGPT here for this debate.
Oh, this is just another good one. So I don't know of any economists. Has anyone in this audience ever heard anyone predict or name what a whole bunch of new middle-class jobs could be? Like, anyone? That's right, because nobody, oh, one person. Don't say podcasting. What is it? Mobile app development. Okay. Yeah.
So when Apple was criticized for shipping all these manufacturing jobs to China, China's making the iPhones really cheap. And the argument is Apple can make them in North America for roughly the same cost. Well, what Apple did by building this iPhone in China is they built a whole brand new market. Apple built a whole brand new market for app developers
that didn't exist before. Billions and billions of dollars of economy growth simply by moving their manufacturing to China and opening up a whole new opportunity for middle-class developers to build apps from scratch, right? Instagram from scratch, all the Facebook apps from scratch. So I think it's a misnomer to say that technology can't create new opportunities. We're not looking for them, or we're not looking in the right place.
Okay, we'll come back to you in the question period, but thank you.
Yeah, no, but absolutely. So when I say the middle class is shrinking, well, imagine like an hourglass figure. Upper income jobs are also increasing as a share of the economy, which is good, but so are lower income jobs increasing as a share of the economy, and that's not good. Shouldn't everyone be moving up? So yeah, I mean, when I hear people talking about new jobs created by technology, they usually say podcasting or social media influencing. But yes, there's of course more software developer and app developer jobs too.
All right, let's keep this going. And I'm sorry if you're a podcaster. Number 3, CERB. So pandemic. This came up actually. Both Ken and Evelyn both made comments. What did we really learn from it?
Yeah, on the CERB, I think a lot of people have been entrenched in their views, both for and against, because there's a lot of stories you can tell, both for and against. I personally know a number of business leaders who said they had a hard time getting people to come to work during CERB. Statistically speaking, this wasn't really seen in the numbers, but that doesn't take away from the difficulty that some of these businesses had. So a lot of people say, well, it's not a job. Oops, it's a. Yeah.
We'll just take a moment here, guys. Okay, we're okay. Let's keep going then. Let us know if you need anything.
Some would say it's not an issue with income support. It's an issue with we have a wage problem that businesses aren't paying enough. So businesses should pay more. Well, naysayers would say, well, that's bad for the economy for businesses to say more, to pay more. Where you stand on that? Well, that's up to you. But we did see during the pandemic, we saw businesses competing to pay more wages and more benefits, especially in the leisure and hospitality industries. And whether that's good or bad, I leave that to you to think about.
Yeah, wage increases and labor shortages. Sounds terrible, Floyd. Good point. Sheila.
Okay, so I'm going to do part of his job now, because I actually sat down with some colleagues and a federal minister to talk about the impact of CERB, and I got the view from inside the federal government, mostly the finance types, and that was that for them, CERB was a sort of public relations disaster, because when they had to start asking for some money back, some people didn't like them and they got bad press, and they were talking to another saner politician in Toronto one day, though. We went through this kind of mental imagining exercise. Think what Toronto would have looked like without CERB. Just imagine this city without CERB. Like, it's impossible. CERB saved the economy. It saved lives. It saved careers. As Ken showed, like, people went on. The comment that we heard, like, really, really often was that it gave them breathing room so that you can think about what you're going to do next. Think about, I've been in this crappy job. Now I can investigate getting a better one. So, it gave people lots of opportunities. CERB was not a basic income. It was designed for a pandemic. It was designed in an emergency. So one of the lessons we need to take from that is that we should really be doing a better job of designing policy that avoids crises rather than trying to deal with them in the middle of it, and change the rules every week so that people don't know what they're applying for. They don't know what they qualify for. So, designing a really good basic income and taking the time to do it right, but not a long time, because we know a lot already. Like, there are lots of lessons from CERB that can help us do better policy.
I think she's got you there, Floyd.
Well, a lot of people who are against CERB are also against any kind of social support, at least more the extremists, and they would. I would want them to know, and I can't do this naysayer thing, but is that the criticisms of CERB are the criticisms of social assistance programs, so that you lose it all when you go back to work. So some people weren't going back to work because their job sucked and it paid less than CERB. But that's why the Conservative Party, of all people, said to make CERB have a clawback, just like basic income does, that you get to keep it in part when you work, which, what other program has that? Unemployment insurance has this exact same clawback. So it's like almost like expanding EI, but for everyone all the time, where you're incentivized to work. And that's what the Conservatives wanted, and that is what makes it better than CERB. So next time you're in a bar discussing why CERB worked or didn't, remember that CERB's problems are welfare's problems, and basic income solves those problems.
Yeah, and if I can add just like one small comment, like again, from a real life perspective on the labor shortage issue, talking to this lovely woman over here earlier about, you know, the kind of thing that she does in real life. And you look around Toronto, there were massive numbers of people in tent cities. You can't be at your job if you're guarding your tent. You can't be at your job if you're in line at the food bank. You know, like, there's workers. We have let them get to a state where it's getting harder and harder to crawl out of that kind of situation, and we could have prevented it.
Okay, so let's continue in the economic genre. Alternatives to basic income, raising the minimum wage, introducing job guarantees, or just lowering taxes. So some of these alternatives, what are maybe the counter-arguments? And I'll let you off the hook here, Floyd. Maybe you can lead with, you know, what are the both of you actually, what are the counter-arguments to some of these other programs, expanding some of these other programs that we already have?
Sure, so I'll go through your list. I think I've got the same list on both of these pages. So minimum wage, yeah, raise the minimum wage. But that only works if you are able to be in the labor force full year, full time, and don't really have any other responsibilities or any other income needs beyond the very, very basics. You might be able to survive. Or if you have a spouse who's also working, you might be able to survive. But yes, people should be paid decently for the work they're doing. So that's not an either or. It's like we do all these things. The same kind of holds with, you know, lower income taxes. Well, that only works if you're actually making money, and we're talking about people who aren't making enough money. The job guarantee is my favorite one. And again, like, I would invite people to do a kind of visioning exercise. I've seen some of these job guarantee programs run in third world countries where they actually have had some success. And I'm also, to be clear, not arguing that our governments don't have a role in making sure that there is job creation and that, you know, there are opportunities out there for people. But the idea, I mean, just like, think about the bureaucrats that run the social assistance system and all the rules and the this and that. You're going to create a system that's going to guarantee everybody a job? Like, the administration of that is going to cost, like, you can't even imagine. And who decides what the job is? You or them? And again, if you have any disabilities, any physical limitations, if you have children, if you have an elderly relative you have to take care of, if anything interferes with your ability to be in the paid labor force, job guarantee is just useless to you. But envisioning this thing happening in Canada just blows my mind. Like, it's crazy, cuckoo.
Yeah, I'm a little surprised that was on the list too, but Floyd, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, there's a story when right-wing economist Milton Friedman went to China in the 1970s, and he saw a bunch of people with shovels digging a trench, and he asked his guide, why are they using shovels and not bulldozers? And he said, it's a job creation program. He said, well, why don't you give them spoons? A lot more jobs.
And if anybody still has any doubts, there's an excellent book written by David Graeber called Bullshit Jobs. We don't need any more of them.
On the minimum wage side, I've heard it argued in both directions. Some more free market oriented people say you don't need a minimum wage with the basic income because people on basic income can negotiate their own wages to whatever they want because they have the ability to do so. And we saw that during CERB. We saw incomes go up. We saw during the 1970s income experiment in Manitoba, wages at the median went up 6.8%. And these weren't people getting the basic income. Why? Because there's a trickle-up effect from people at lower incomes negotiating for better pay and seeking better work. So there's an argument that you don't need minimum wage. There's an argument that you do need minimum wage with or even instead of with the basic income because it improves the work incentive. And then there's the argument that you don't need basic income at all. You only need to raise the minimum wage because, again, it'll get more people, able-bodied people off of programs like Ontario Works into jobs. And eventually the free market will solve all of our problems. And, but on this note about other kinds of programs, I wouldn't be doing my job here if I didn't mention as a pretend naysayer that there is the BC Basic Income Panel, a group of economists who concluded that there's much better ways to target poverty than something as expensive and politically challenging as a basic income. And Ken had a slide up showing a number of different programs that already provide cash support in targeted ways. So they would argue that that'll cost less and reach people who need it. But that we've already heard about the administrative challenges that could have. But it may be that in this country, we get something that almost approaches the level of a basic income through 30 different programs that at least are cash-based and not means-tested based. But we would argue you might argue that one basic income would be better than all those hundreds of programs.
Okay, so I'm going to ask one last question, and it's the question I think a lot of people who aren't familiar with basic income, probably came into this room with, and I know we've talked about it a couple of times, but how do we pay for it, right? Different ways to pay for it. What are your best ideas on what changes need to be made in order to pay for this program or a program?
Okay, well, naysayers would say it's not affordable. It's too expensive. $80 billion is a lot. That's something like a third, I think, of the federal budget. It's 8% of the overall budget of all levels of government in Canada put together. And they would argue that this saying that it costs less than poverty costs, poverty costs more, it could be argued that it's also more rhetorical because you cannot really reclaim those costs back in order to fund a program. Those are downstream benefits, which Senator Pate yesterday asked the PBO officer in the hearing, said, did you guys look at downstream benefits? And they didn't. So yeah, you cannot reclaim those costs to pay a basic income. So it doesn't actually help it be cheaper. But it would be obviously amazing for society if we had less crime and less people in hospitals and such. So yeah, so maybe naysayer wouldn't tell you that it would grow the economy by more than it costs, although it wouldn't pay for itself. That is something that some might say, but it would not pay for itself, financially speaking anyway. But it would grow GDP by a lot more than it costs, which you can find that research at eBay Works' website.
Okay, Sheila, what's your best thinking on this?
Okay, so the paying for it depends on what it is you're paying for. The naysayers always use gross costs and, try to inflate what the cost of this thing is. They use models that are not what anybody's advocating for. When you look at reasonable models, like the ones that we modeled, like the way the Ontario Basic Income Pilot was designed, then you've got a reasonable way of ensuring that you have a good, fair kind of system. The costs are reasonable. The money's not going to people who don't need it. It really is getting to those who do. And then you look at what your priorities are. We talked about the cost of poverty. It's not just the cost of poverty. Like, we've got so many programs that we run that aren't getting the results they need. We need to look at figuring out what is going to get us the return on investment, what's going to get results, and a basic income does that. So when you start looking at all kinds of things that can be redesigned, like Evelyn mentioned, and the Parliamentary Budget Office did some of this based on they took some of the recommendations we made, but you look at things that are already in the system. They're automatic, things like the GST credit, like the personal amount. People talk about them being eliminated. They're not being eliminated. They're being redesigned, reallocated to make them work, to streamline, to make it all more effective. So, and then you look at what are the priorities? And, you know, as Floyd said, like, are our priorities subsidizing fossil fuel development? Are our priorities the billions of dollars that are going out in tax credits that are only available to the very, very wealthiest? They're going out to capital gains, which gets privileged tax treatment that the rest of us on our earnings don't. It's a matter of priorities. It's not about finding new money for the most part. It's about figuring out how we spend it more wisely.
I think that's a great point for us to finish on. It is about priorities, like what's important for us as a country. So thank you very much for your spirited debate. I hate to say this, Floyd, but you lost badly. Are we going to do Q&A now, or are we going to do give directly? Okay. All right. So, Dr. Forget, would you like to? I'm sorry we can't fit you on the stage.
Somebody's going to fall off.
All right. So, questions from the audience. This young man with his hand up.
Thank you so much for speaking to us today and talking about basic income. So my question is that, you know, when I see discussions about basic income, I often find that it's a little bit muddled because it seems to address two separate questions at the same time, right? So one is a question about how should we structure the social safety net? Should we make it unconditional? Should we make it targeted? Should we have all the bureaucracy around all the separate programs? You know, do we require people to work or not work or whatever? And then there's a separate question about what should the size of the social safety net be, right? Should it be expanded? Should we raise a bunch more revenue, you know, massively increase the size? Should we keep it roughly the same, right? So my question is for you guys, you know, what's the main priority? You know, would you support just redesigning all our social safety net programs into one streamlined program approach, you know, just redistribute the money, keep the social safety net spending the same? Would you support that? Or is this something you would only support if it means a massive expansion of the social safety net? Thank you.
Yeah, let me try that if I can. There's no point in having a brilliantly designed program that pays people $5,000 a year, right? You have to have adequacy. I think you've set up a false dichotomy. I think the two things go together. I don't think we're necessarily talking about a massive expansion of the social system. We're talking about a better designed, better targeted social system. And in order to do that, and in order to get the benefits from it, we have to make sure that people have enough money to live on. So the two go together. I think it's a false dichotomy to choose one over the other.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that. I mean, what we see in improved health, especially improved mental health. I mean, one of the things that struck us out of the early results of the Ontario pilot before it was canceled, and we're looking for good results, we were still shocked at how quickly people's mental health status turned around. And people, the baseline survey showed people going into this were a mess. I mean, they were really, really struggling. And so people were reducing medications. They're reducing the need for health treatments. They're improving their health so they can get back to work. Like, there are so many spin-offs to this thing. So you don't need to start talking about reducing or taking away programs. They will erode on their own if people don't need them. But you have to give them the choice. It's up to them. You've got your money. If you still need services and you need services for things that are beyond the basics, you know, disability supports, we have seniors benefits. We still provide age-appropriate services for seniors. The same with children. It's not an either or. But you're going to reduce the demand on services. You're not going to have hospitals treating people who need a sandwich. Like, you're using it more wisely, and you don't have to cut anything. When we brought in child benefits in this country and then really increased them, those people huge numbers of those types of families were on social assistance. They're not anymore. The world didn't come to an end. All kinds of people in the service sector didn't lose their jobs. We managed this transition really well.
Okay, thank you.
In a slightly different tack on that, one of my heroes in this movement, Professor Guy Standing, likes to say that even a small basic income, the emancipatory benefit of it is worth far more than the actual amount of the cash, because people in extreme poverty can emancipate. They can afford to buy some basics to get ahead. We've seen last couple of years, a number of US-based pilots with giving only $500 a month to people resulted in people getting better quality jobs by the end of it because they had that little bit of security they could bank on. Some naysayers like to point to Finland saying, look, Finland tried it and it didn't work. Well, the Finland experiment showed, as Evelyn pointed out, like no real changes in employment, but improvements in health and happiness and views of government and society. But I remember hearing recently that the organizer of the Finland programs said they weren't studying this aspect, but he heard anecdotally near the end of it, a lot of people saying that they were in better jobs than they were before. So that's a clear benefit from a small amount, because Finland wasn't really a basic income. It was only like 800 euros, and it was given to people who are already on social assistance. The program in Quebec right now that's called basic income is moving kind of like the Finnish one. It's only people who have been unemployed for the long term, who are already getting social assistance. About 100,000 people so far they're gonna get slightly more money, and more conditions will be removed, so they can actually work and earn income without losing too much of the benefit. So that's actually the belief, is that less conditions will lead to better outcomes, even though it's not actually a sustainable, adequate amount of work, of income rather. So even a small amount can have an emancipatory benefit.
Okay, thank you. Okay, quite a few questions here. Or I can just give you my microphone.
Oh, me already? Well, something that concerns me about basic income is people talk about how it's emergency, like it's an emergency measure for this massive technological unemployment that's happening. I don't think that's a very good way of advocating it. I would like all these smart basic income people to enlighten us about how the basic income will create full employment at good wages, at good total incomes.
Anyone like to take that one first?
I don't think that's the goal of a basic income.
I don't think we necessarily need full employment in the traditional way that people think about it. And I'll give you an example. I was actually working inside government with people working at HRSDC or whatever it used to be called, one of its incarnations, and some OECD people, and they were working on measures that would improve the participation of women in the labor force. And their goal, they thought, was to get women's labor force participation up to the level of men's, and then that would be equality, and that would be full employment. And I'm going, okay, the last child was just born, and the human race is over. Like, you can't do that. There are other aspects to our lives. We work. We all work at all kinds of things. And not all of it is paid employment, and not the most important work is paid employment. So this idea of full employment, the way we traditionally conceptualize it, I think, doesn't necessarily seem like a great goal to me. People need productive things to do.
Yeah, and I would rehash again that it's been shown to raise wages because people can negotiate better pay, and that trickles up to all levels. We've seen it in the numbers. We've seen it during COVID. And if you want to take the utopian future view of what technology might do for us, we should be working a little bit less. It's better off if most people are working less than 40 hours than some people working 40 hours and others not able to work at all. And something like a basic income would be needed to help such a transition should we face those times at some point.
Yeah, maybe 4-day work week will be our next session, sometimes next year. Okay, we got lots of questions still, so Andrea's going to go to right here.
Hi, I'm an anti-poverty activist, and I am also an AI consultant, which is a very interesting place to be right now. And I was looking at some stats from the U.S. labor market today, and they are kind of astounding. Just give me a second to pull these up. Yes, sorry about that. Looking at some stats on the U.S. labor market, there are 9.6 million job openings in the U.S., but only 6.4 million unemployed workers. I'm wondering if you know what the equivalent is in Canada and how many of those jobs potentially could be replaced by a basic income. Has that analysis been done? Any insight into what that labor market impact could be if there was a basic income on job openings as well?
So as the non-economist here, I'm going to answer based, again, on some real-life examples of what we saw in the Ontario pilot. A lot of people started their own jobs, you know, and very simple things, like one guy managed to afford to buy some paintbrushes and some equipment and became a house painter, and like that was he created his own. And then with that experience and some references, he may go on to do something else. Other people, you know, took a little bit of time. One went through 2 or 3 jobs, started, left, until he found one that he thought really was going to be a longer term thing. So I think if the human capacity is amazing, if people have that breathing room and have some capacity and some resources, you know, they at least have some options and some opportunities to help do things for themselves while Evelyn answers the question about the larger labor market.
I don't have the data for Canada about the larger labor market. I think all I'd like to say is that I think one of the things basic income does is it offers us an opportunity to think a little bit more about our relationship to work across society. I think most people believe, and I certainly believe, that work is good for people. I think it's really, really important. But I think the part of work that's good for people is having a sense of purpose in your life, doing something that you think's valuable. And the notion that any job is good for people, I think, reflects a certain privileged background, because I've certainly worked some crappy jobs in my life that I don't think are good for anybody. And if we could invent a machine that would replace them, I'm all for it. I mean, I think that we need to rethink what we mean by work, what we mean by our human contributions. And so, I mean, I think that's one thing, and I think it's really important. And I think if we have sort of a longer historical perspective on the labor market, if we take ourselves back, I mean, then way, way back, before the Industrial Revolution, and we start thinking about some of the great scientific accomplishments that are made in human history, the artistic and philosophical accomplishments, these weren't made by people who worked in the traditional sense. They certainly weren't made by the cottiers and the people working in the factories and working on the looms. They were made by people who had patronage, who had opportunities to achieve. I mean, that's a very utopian kind of notion, because most of us aren't going to do that. And I think if you give people freedom, most of us like structure in our lives, and most of us will reach out there for some kind of a job and we'll find a place for ourselves. But the idea of defining ourselves by a job and talking about how we fit into a labor market that's defined in a very narrow and very 21st century focused way, I think is not good for us, and it's not good for our society. There are a lot of jobs that just simply shouldn't exist. And if I can go back to that thing about the job openings being greater than the number of people, and I'm sure that's true. I'm sure that's true. There are a lot of empty jobs and people are having difficulties filling them. I want to go back to Floyd's argument a little while ago. I don't know if this was pro or con. I got a little confused with his answers. But, you know, a lot of jobs exist and they're not filled because they don't pay enough. I mean, there is a market out there. I know a lot of people don't support the idea of a market, but there's demand curves and supply curves. And like, if you're not filling your job, there's a pretty easy way to fill it.
Absolutely.
And so, I mean, I think we need to think a little bit more about what we expect. And it's leading, I don't want to talk forever. I'm just going to say one more thing. You know, we talk about the labor market, and we've got all kinds of terribly exploitative programs in place. And I'm thinking about the Temporary Foreign Workers Program that keeps wages artificially low in Canada. I mean, the stupidest thing you could do is to bring people in as temporary foreign workers and give them a basic income. I mean, the whole program doesn't make any sense. That program needs to be corrected. It's keeping wages artificially low. So basic income is not only inviting us to rethink our relationship to the job market, it's asking us to rethink the entire program that we've put in place to keep people paid too little to survive, that make us rely on people that we exploit to provide the services and the goods that we need. And that makes us okay with that, you know, with importing people and giving them terrible jobs. I mean, we need to rethink all of those things, and basic income is an opportunity to do that.
Okay, I'm going to actually tie us off there. There's a bunch more questions. We have one more speaker, but you've got lots of food and drink, and you can tackle these people individually and ask them questions once we get through our program. Is that okay? All right, cool. Thank you.